welcome Nick Williams onto stage one here, Chief Procurement Officer at Hays, who's really building very much on the messages of the previous speaker, Robert Deliveroo, in how procurement is moving from cost police to growth partner. So please welcome Nick Williams on stage.
Good afternoon, London. How are we feeling? 4:05. Yeah, I know, I'm in between you and the drinks, so I thought I'd mix it up a bit. So good afternoon, thank you. My name is Nick Williams. Yes, it is a real stab vest. No, it's not really. Although we are in London and certain people think you should have one in London. I'm not sure whether that's right or not. But yeah. And who doesn't love a bit of cosplay, really? You know? So thank you very much for asking me along to speak to you today. So as I say, I know it's 4:05, and but you're here, so that's great. Thank you. Drinks are on their way, and you're probably thinking about your evening and your night in the Premier Inn, so I won't bang on, right? But I do want to share some thoughts for you to take away as the conference progresses. And I want to talk about the police. And yes, I'll overuse as many analogies as I possibly can in a single talk. And perhaps I have overdosed on streaming dramas, who knows. Bizarrely, the more I watched, the more I saw procurement behaving like the police. Now, this is not a bad thing entirely, right? Our organizations need a presence that protects and serves, right? But what about approachability? What about empathy and willingness to flex? What about those sorts of things that are really important and not really the image of policing, and I often don't see as the image of procurement? Who's ever felt in this room that you have either experienced or been part of procurement behaving a little bit like the police? Be honest. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And our stakeholders often experience this the same way. You know, the blue light, the shouting, the enforcement, the suspicion that we bring to them. And is procurement the first place they go for help, or is it their last resort? We do love the authority, though, don't we, in procurement? And we patrol for overspend. We set up our checkpoints. We run our stop and search line items on Excel. We've tuned our radios to one frequency, savings. Yeah? But modern policing isn't just about arrests. It's about other things. It's about prevention. It's about trust. It's about partnership, shared intelligence, rapid response. Officers who know the neighborhood walk the beat, right? They listen first and they build relationships. So that's the picture for procurement as a growth partner, in my mind. You're not just foot patrol, you're detectives, gathering evidence, being forensic, using data and AI, running a control room, routing the expertise where it needs to go, special ops when needed, forming cross-functional squads, community liaison with your suppliers as partners. You still have a badge. It's a lanyard, right? And you provide ethics and safety and stewardship. You still have a radio, although it's probably Outlook, and that coordinates, doesn't command. And a policy, a rule book. And you keep people safe when they're moving fast. And procurement does great work, but often isn't seen as a trusted partner. How often do we hear that? You get called at the end of the process, after the blue lights have been flashing for a while. You arrive at the scene, and it's already been taped off. And you're asked to tidy up the paperwork. Who's been in that situation? Yeah. Thank you. So I'd like to offer a new vision. I'd like to offer a vision that makes procurement the trusted partner to the business. And I have 3 pillars. So for each, I'll share a real-world example and some moves that you can try when you go back to the office. The first that's the second. That's the first. Collaboration. To start with, collaboration. This is this community policing mindset, embedding category leads with the business to walk the beat and learn the neighborhood. Creating supplier councils, a bit like Neighborhood Watch. You don't have to call it Neighborhood Watch, that's got a terrible reputation. But it's that sort of thing, sharing intelligence and spotting the risks early. My example of working this in practice was with a product team in my business who needed a niche consultancy brought on board very quickly. So instead of asking them to complete forms at the beginning, middle, and end of that process, we embedded a category lead there for a couple of weeks. And he listened, mapped the objectives, created a 2-page scope, and then within 7 days of the brief, he got to a signed statement of work with the risk guardrails everyone endorsed. So in summary, for collaboration, good looks like quarterly supplier roundtables, joint risk registers, shared improvement tracking. And what do I think you should do? Well, it's up to you, but I would pick one category. Ask the business for a desk, or for a couple of weeks, and walk the beat. That's pillar 1. This is pillar 2. Simple technology. Invest in a control room. Get a real-time view of demand in your business. A real-time view of spend, if you can, and performance, and maybe risk. But that's all you need to start off with. And treat that data that you get like evidence. Clean collection, a clear chain of custody, who owns what, analysis that stands up in the boardroom like it would in court. Recently, we found one of those quiet renewals that happens every year. Been rolling on for about 3 years, and it got flagged in our control room about 90 days out. So we triaged it, agreed to a short extension, ran the options, and cut the cost by about 12% and improved the service. So what does good look like in this space? Well, probably a single intake channel, some clear priority codes, 24, 48, 72-hour service levels for your stakeholders, some simple playbooks, and weekly updates. So when you go back to work, think about how you reduce your intake methods to 1. Do you imagine calling the police? There's 1 intake method. There's actually 2. What are the intake methods for calling the police? 999 or 111. That's it. You can go to the station if you want, but generally they're not there. So, publish your response times. Again, I think the police are adept at doing such things. And if you don't have a system, build one. Put a shared mailbox in place. Put a Kanban board up so people can track, your stakeholders can track what's going on with your function. The final pillar is capability. I've heard a bit of this today in some of the talks. It's been really interesting. And it's something that procurement needs to continue to do. It does it quite well in a number of aspects, but it still needs more. More capability. And I'm talking about your people. Our people need to be trained to think commercially, not just contractually. Pair your new joiners with the business. Put them into the business. What they call in policing terms as a ride-along. Teach your people judgment. How do you ask that second question, for example? What's the outcome we're looking for? What's the risk if we do nothing? What's the best alternative? Those are the questions that our procurement team should be asking the business. We had a new joiner shadow a senior stakeholder for a couple of weeks. And she learned when to apply the rule book and when to call in special ops. On her next assignment, she went straight to a design workshop, replaced the 60-page RFP document with a 4-page outcome brief. Both the supplier and the business thanked us for obvious reasons. So what does good look like in this space? Well, for training, I think a simple curriculum, evidence-based business cases that they can take to their stakeholders, some basics of negotiation, some data stories for the CFO. I've heard about stories today. They're really, really important. So our people should have stories to be able to relay to the CFO to get that engagement that they'll need. And of course, other tips that you can put into place for training, such as realistic role plays, where you're putting them in a situation that they will be able to replicate in front of a stakeholder. So what should you do next? Pair each of your new joiners with a business sponsor for the quarter and do a ride-along next week. So that's your 3 pillars. I think if you use these, and I use these, by the way, I think if you use these, you'll move from those checkpoints I talked about to corridors. So you'll be creating fast lanes for low-risk, high-value work. And if you need a fast incident response, set up a model for strategic opportunities with those cross-functional squads that can assemble in hours rather than days or weeks. And why not have a look at your success metrics and maybe reframe them, not just savings, but maybe speed or risk reduction or quality or innovation. So, just take a moment now, and I'd like to know what you think would make the biggest difference in your team. I'm happy to open the floor to any questions or comments, challenges or heckling. And I'm thinking about what's the biggest barrier to this working in your organization, for example, to help you with a potential question. Or what's the one thing you might think about doing differently next week?
Any comments, any feedback, any questions? There's one, Kendra, over there. Be careful with the questions, sir. You'll be walking away in handcuffs and a truncheon.
Hi, Nick. Thank you. That was fantastic. Just what we needed, I think, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Well done.
Thank you.
I'm really intrigued by that walking the beat in the neighbourhood. Even though I'm at a tech company, I'm struggling to get all my team, as is the rest of the company, back into the office to meet people, walk the beat, walk the floors. Some people will get it instinctively and are doing it and are succeeding as a result, but not everybody else does. Have you got any tips to help people back in that way?
One thing I would do is tie it into, lightly tie it into their objectives for their roles. And if you're doing a reasonable job of helping people with their PDPs, link it to that. So give them some objectives about learning about specific parts of the business, about their stakeholders, about how that business operates, as an incentive, a nice, positive incentive with a reasonable time frame that they would be able to come back and, say, present to the rest of the team as part of their PDP on their stakeholder and what's happening in their business, and then support them as much as you can with travel arrangements and getting them into the office, talking to the stakeholders themselves, making sure they were supportive. How about that for an idea? Anyone got any better ideas? No? Okay. Here you are, John.
Okay, thank you. And any further questions? There's a gentleman just here, Kendra.
So you talked about some interesting thoughts at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So you woke some of us up, myself included. You talked about innovation, and you've heard of this term, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Procurement can talk all they want about innovation, but really it comes down to measured value that we deliver as part of that innovation. Sometimes we're challenged to capture what that quantified value that innovation delivers. And you talked about metrics. Can you share some specifics on how you've been able to capture that measured value coming out of it? And how challenging have you seen it, particularly if that definition is not aligned between procurement and some of the colleagues internally?
Oh, great question. I think the answer for me is always quite simple, was what did we set out to do when we set out to do it? And then what did we agree good would, I use that term good, what does good look like? It's a bit overused, but it is when you're sitting particularly with a stakeholder or a part of the business, doesn't matter whether it's the CFO, CIO, CTO, we should be having strategic enough discussions that say, what do you want from procurement? How is that going to help you? And what do you think for you innovation looks like? And how might we deliver it for you? So agreeing it up front, I think, is the responsibility of procurement to do. Because procurement looks at itself far too often, in my opinion. Looks at what we're doing, what are our problems, what are our issues, and ignoring what's going on in the business and working towards the business's goals in a way that is more beneficial to the organization as a whole. So I would say if you don't know how to measure innovation, that's because you haven't asked your stakeholders what it means to them, and then what are they going to get out of it when it happens.
Nick, just one reflection from me, just to wind up, is that our previous speaker, Rob from Deliveroo, really positioned his procurement function not just as a driver of capital growth, but the way I interpreted it is that procurement had to grasp the leadership and transform the leadership and not take control per se, but it did much more than just become an engine as a driver for growth. How does that resonate with you? Where are you along that path? Do you see that happening increasingly in procurement?
Yeah, I think we have to be bold. And one of my previous roles, we got a new CEO. CEO came to me and some of my colleagues and asked what was happening in my categories that I was responsible for. And I said, well, I don't really know. Okay, why is that? Because we don't have the data. Okay, what are we going to do about that, Nick? We're going to get the data, Mike. Okay, now you're the CEO, so could you help me with opening that up, making sure that happens? Yes, of course, absolutely. So I was honest. It was a very scary conversation to have with the new CEO, but I was honest. I said, look, we don't have it within the organization. This is the problem. What do we need to do to get it? And when I got that data and presented that back to him and his leadership team in a very simple format, just a dashboard, that's when the real magic happened. Well, I had no idea we were spending this much money with this number of suppliers across all these parts of our business. Thank you, Nick. No problem. What would you like to do about it, Nick? I said, well, what do you want to do about it? You're the boss. And he said, well, how much are we spending? Oh, it was about £300 million a year. Is that the right number, Nick, £300 million a year? I don't know. But how would I know? Because I didn't have the data to tell me whether £300 million a year on those categories was the right number. And that taught me a brilliant lesson about procurement. The questions are really simple. Is that the right number? I don't know. Let me go and find out what the right number is. So I heard what Rob was saying, and I thought it was great. We have to be bold in front of very senior stakeholders who have got very senior jobs and very serious things to do. Those questions are very simple. Is that the right number? Yeah. And we as procurement should be able to say yes or no. And we should be able to also say, what would you like to do? Would you like to make the number smaller? I assume you probably would. And then the question I got was, yeah, what's the impact of making this number smaller, apart from saving some money? Does our risk go up? Do we have the skill set that we need? Can we get the technology? Great questions. And that, I think, is in answer to your question about how does procurement add value, that's how it adds value.
Thank you. It's sort of all about the data stupid as well as the people stupid and all the other stuff. Superintendent Williams, thank you very much indeed for joining.
Thank you very much.